Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Furlong, and today we're talking classification. The branch of biology that classifies organisms is known as taxonomy. That is the study of species and their classification. In fact, some people, this is one of their jobs, is to classify new species as they are found. So let's go back and revisit our definition of a species. We said that it is a group of similar organisms who can interbreed and produce fertile offspring under normal conditions. So they have to meet all three of these criteria. They have to be able to interbreed, they have to be able to produce offspring that's also fertile, and these would be happening in nature. Many closely related species can produce offspring, but oftentimes they're not fertile. So for instance, a horse and a donkey can produce a mule. Mules themselves cannot have offspring. But there's always going to be exceptions to any definition we have in biology, and there are a few exceptions to this. For instance, all dogs are the same species, but maybe not all dogs can interbreed with one another. Looking at these two, I don't think that's going to be a possibility. But then in other dogs, they have been known to mate with coyotes in the wild. Now the resulting offspring are called coyote dogs, and they are fertile. But because this happens so rarely, they are still considered two separate species. Now within any species, we know that there are variations. These are genetic differences that occur between individuals within a particular species. We've talked about variations. That was one of the mechanisms of natural selection, is that some variations are favorable, some are not. But there's different kinds of variations, so we're going to take a look at some of those real quick. First of all, there's what's called polymorphism. Now, poly means many, morph means like body, if you will. And so these are this would be where we have two or more distinct forms that coexist in a population. Now, an example of this is the peppered moth. Remember, they are the same species, they just have this variation in their coloring. Sometimes it's favorable, sometimes it's not. Another one is dimorphism. Di means two. These are differences in species that are related to gender or age. So for instance, here we see a male cardinal. They have bright red feathers, but the female cardinals, they don't have the same coloration that the males do. But yet they're the same species. Sometimes the age of the organisms make them look different. For instance, here's a typical housefly, but when they're juveniles, they look like this. They're maggots. They don't look anything like one another, and yet they're the same species. There can be geographic variation. So humans are a good example of this. Because humans evolved in different parts of the world, we have different characteristics. Now we're all the same species, but oftentimes we can look at a person and identify where their ancestors may be from. There can be individual variations. So this is differences between any two individuals in a sexually reproducing species. When I was a kid, I would always go to the dolphin shows at Cedar Point. Yes, they had dolphin shows back then. And I always wondered how the trainers knew which dolphin was which, because they all had their own names. When I look at these animals, they all look exactly the same to me. But to the trainers, they know exactly who is who, because no two of these dolphins look exactly the same. Just like no two people look exactly the same. So when we go to classify these organisms, we put them into different groups or different levels. Starting off with the largest of all the groups is the domain group. Domains can be broken down into kingdoms. Kingdoms are broken down into smaller groups called phylums. Phylums are broken down into classes, classes into order, orders into family, families into genus, and genuses into species. So this is what we mean when we say we are classifying species. This system was developed by Carl Linnaeus. Prior to Linnaeus, the system that was being used was developed by Aristotle a couple thousand years earlier. And he said that everything was either a plant or an animal. And if it was a plant, it was a type of a grass or a shrub or a tree. If it was an animal, it lived in the land, it lived in the water, or it can fly. Now you can see that there are some problems when we try to classify organisms using a method like this. What was nice about Linnaeus' system was that if we need to add new groups, we can. So for instance, when Linnaeus first set this system up, he only had two kingdoms, plants and animals. Today we have 6 kingdoms. When he set this up, there weren't even the domain levels. We've added those domain levels. If we find a new species that doesn't fit into a species we already know of, we can create a new species group. Now notice that the genus and species is underlined. That's for a particular reason. This is how we get the scientific name. This is what's known as the binomial nomenclature. In other words, it's a two-name naming system is what that really means. And so we use the genus and the species to get its classification. So for instance, Homo sapiens, that's our scientific name for humans. Homo is the genus that we belong to, sapiens is the species that we belong to. Now when we write scientific names, I do expect you to write them properly. That is either by italicizing them or by underlining them. And notice that the only capital letter is the very first letter in the genus. Once you have mentioned a scientific name, it is appropriate that you could just abbreviate the genus name. So let me give you a few examples of some scientific names. Here we see Canis lupus and Canis familiaris. You know what any of these two things are? You're familiar with them. That's right, Canis lupus is a wolf. Canis familiaris is a regular old dog. Here's why we use two names. Because they have the same genus name, we know that they are very closely related to one another. And certainly dogs and wolves are closely related to each other. But take a look at these bottom two, Felis domesticus and Musca domesticus. Are they similar to one another? No, the only thing they have in common is the word domesticus, which means house. So Felis domesticus is a house cat. Musca domesticus is a house fly. They're not related much at all. And so this kind of shows us why taxonomists will use two names instead of one. Imagine if we only used one name for every species, we'd have to come up with hundreds of millions of different names. And notice too that the scientific names are always written in Latin. Latin is a language that's no longer spoken, and so it doesn't change anymore. And it doesn't matter what language you're writing something in, you will always write the scientific name in Latin. For instance, here is an excerpt from a Chinese biology textbook. Can you make out what the scientific name is? Yeah, it's right there. Everything else is written in Chinese, scientific name written in Latin. Now one of the neat things though about scientific names is that if you find something that has been classified and it's brand new, you can come up with the species name yourself. So here's a few examples of some scientific names. These are real. Agathidium vaderi, which is named after some type of a slime mold beetle. Or Godzillius. Godzillius is a teeny tiny little organism. Danianella draculae, this is a fish that has fangs on it. Utah raptor Spielbergi. So this is a raptor that was discovered in Utah when they were filming Jurassic Park. There's Draco Rex hogwartsia. So this is a new dinosaur that was discovered by a Harry Potter fan. There's Aptostichus angelina joliae, which is a type of a spider. Or how about Agra schwarzeneggeri, another type of a beetle. So scientists can have a sense of humor as well. Well, we're going to be taking a look at this classification system in class, and I'll see you in class.